Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the INCHSTONES podcast. You know that I believe so deeply in that the smallest of moments carry the greatest of meaning. And today, we're stepping into something a little different. I have had the privilege of sharing so many of your stories through over 120 plus episodes now on real families and clinicians and therapists. But sometimes, and in the vein of what this episode is going to be about, sometimes even fiction has a very unique ability to tell the truth and about this life that we're leading. And today, my guest is Jacqueline Friedland. She's the author of a book that came out today, literally today, August 4th. And it's actually a novel about a mother who, in raising her teenage autistic son, Leo, navigating her career, middle-aged life with her own mother's diagnoses, and realizing that the unexpected relationships that come into our life allowed her to best understand herself. And I just think this conversation is going to be a reminder to me and to all of us that the best stories are not here to entertain, they're to reveal and to increase our capacity for empathy. So Jackie, thank you for being here today on INCHSTONES.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. I'm thrilled to be here and to talk about the book.
Awesome. Well, so this is what I first asked when I was approached to have you on the show is, why did you choose fiction for this story?
So I'm a lawyer by training, and it was never my passion. I've always loved the written word and stories. And when I was working as a lawyer, I felt very much like I went very corporate, and I felt like I was representing companies that were fighting over money, and I was not making any sort of positive difference in the world. And I was raised by a mother who was a professor of special ed, who every day she went off to work and she was doing something that mattered. And so I always thought I would have a career that mattered. And when I decided that I just missed literature and writing so much, I felt like I could use stories as a way to, make even if it was very small, positive change in the world, and to spread empathy and to open people's eyes about different issues. And so that's why I went into fiction to begin with. And then for Breathing Underwater, I stumbled on some true statistics that led me to create a whole story, which we can dive into, no pun intended, or save that for later in the conversation.
Yeah, I think as someone I've shared my journey since the very, very beginning, and it was even the hardest of points of like the severity of both my children's diagnoses and the, level 3, deeply apraxic, whole body apraxia, non-speakers. And what I've come to realize as I've shared over the last number of years is that the stories of teenagers and young adults and the sort of matriculation from what I know another autism mom, Jess plus the mess, always says is that when they outgrow cute, it becomes a different story. And I really wanted to know why you, I guess, chose, maybe not consciously or not, that, Leo is a teenager. And those stories are not as easy to swallow for people that don't live this life.
So I think that teenagers in general, across, the entire universe of American teenagers, live a difficult life, different than what we grew up with. And there is so much required of them just, to succeed in school and socially. And then you add on to that various challenges, and it's just that much more difficult. And, they say as a writer, you're supposed to write what you know. And so writing from the perspective of a mother, I have 4 children myself, and I feel like parenting is something I really do know about. The oldest is about to be 22 and the youngest is 15. So they're all sort of in that teen phase right now. And I think that one of the hardest parts for me as a parent is learning to let go and trying to give my kids the independence that they need while also remaining a good support system or structure, if you want to call it, for them. And I believe that for kids on the spectrum, it's so challenging to know how much support do they need. Am I giving them the right infrastructure or am I believing in them enough or not enough? And should I let them stand on their own 2 feet, or should I be here to catch them? And I also, so as I mentioned, my mom was a professor of special ed. And one of the things she used to talk about a lot is how all of the supports after high school kind of like fall off a cliff, like what's
Yep.
available. And so
That
I think
phrase, like off the cliff, is something that we hear so often.
it's really important to think about kids at this stage and what comes next and how are they going to live as independent adults? Is that in their future? And what should be their goals? And all of these things I think was interesting to me. And I wanted to sort of have other people think about it too.
Yeah, the word that I just heard and it just piqued my interest, like that scaffolding of what kind of support needs. I don't think that there's a single person that's going to listen to this that would not agree that we don't have 100% certainty in what that support. What if is it too much? Is it too little? Is it enabling? Their need of more support because I constantly provide it. Like, what is that balance? And I think it almost hits at the root of like the entire nation's autism conversation is that there's never going to be a certain answer for your family, for my family, for another family because of the way autism presents. And it almost is begging us to sit in that uncertainty, right?
Right. And I think also one of the things that was challenging about writing this book is that so the character with autism is Leo.
Mm-hmm.
Leo is just one kid, and he has his challenges and his joys and all of those things, but there's no way to sort of present the universal
Right.
autistic kid. Like everybody is different. And so but yeah, so without having that like sort of without there being a one type of child, it's impossible to have a one solution to know. And I think it's just a lot of trial and error.
And I think hearing it said through different humans' voices, like the way in which you just said that, it can be said in 1,000 different ways. And I think by hearing it more and more and more, just like anything, repetition helps. And I think I sat in a panel recently and I had this mother ask, she looked at me, you could tell like she wanted me to give her the answer to say this was going to be so damn certain for her. And I just said to her, I don't know what exactly is coming into your world that is making you feel like this is the next right thing, but I can see in your eyes that it is. So just trust that. Trust that process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So in Breathing Underwater, there's two main characters. There's Leo, who's this, teenager, 16-year-old with autism, and there's McKenna, who's a Division I college athlete who looks like she should just be, on top of the world. And she's the one who like her world, like her life is just falling apart. And it's her relationship with Leo that ultimately is the thing that kind of saves her.
Yes.
But what is the difference between them is that McKenna has nobody. Her single mother passed away. She's raised by her grandmother, who's sort of, as the book is opening up, it turns out McKenna realizes the grandmother has dementia or is beginning to have dementia, and she has no support system. She has nobody unconditionally behind her. And Leo is the opposite. And this is another thing my mother always used to say, that the one thing that she did see, the one uniform thing from kid to adult to everybody, is that the success stories that she found, there was always a person behind that child who was unconditionally there doing their very best to support them. And not that they always got it right, but that they were there and they were trying.
Right. And that, throughout the novel, that's what I think you answer. You answer through the naturally, evolving storyline. Like, what does it really mean to support and save someone? Because we have so much, piqued curiosity just as humans to know and want to know people's life stories and how they got to where they got to be. And I think that science has shown, and I'm a ravenous, and devour, motivational speakers and things like that. They really say that you do only need one person deeply believing in you. And I think that you did a great job sort of allowing that to be a common thread in this for even the typical young woman of McKenna.
Thank you. The inspiration for this book actually came from I just stumbled on a statistic that over 40% of Americans don't know how to swim. And as someone who grew up around water and was on a swim team, I didn't know that. And I was sort of horrified because it's like a survival skill and people should have the opportunity to learn, et cetera. And I was just kind of researching it. And then I came on to the fact that kids on the spectrum are 160 times as likely as neurotypical kids or to drown.
Yeah,
And
I was down at the NIH in April and I spoke, and the statistic that came out of that meeting is right now it's the number one cause of death for children
yes,
the age of 18. I'm sorry, under the age of 14 with autism, the number one cause of death. I actually had to leave the room.
oh,
I got physically ill because that's how, but you're right. And I'm glad that you're bringing that up to illuminate that as well.
well, so that's how I started thinking about like autistic kids and swimming, and that's sort of like where it began. And then as the story evolved, it was like that support system just sort of came into being because you see Leo and everything that he's willing to try or not try, and it was like an organic thing that
Yes.
happened in the book.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So it was just sort of an
Well,
interesting process for me.
the title, Breathing Underwater, I have had the amazing fortune of having a wonderful special needs swim teacher in my children's life. And specifically, her connection with my daughter, Millie, is so profound. And when I heard the title of your book, I actually said to her, she goes underwater with Millie a lot, like they, counting and doing a lot of that, parallel play. And I said, I've watched my daughter and son with you for, you know, tens and hundreds of hours on end over the years. I don't know what goes on underwater.
That's so
But I
interesting.
do know that the love of that connection and the pool and those lessons are so profound for them, specifically my daughter Millie, that it must be joy. Whatever is underneath that water, I think it's just joy. Because I can't imagine it being anything but that. And I just love that it resonates with your title of your book.
It's so interesting because I feel like they say we have five senses, but to me, there's like this other sense when you're underwater. It's like you're existing in this other reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I always, as a swimmer, loved that. I was, by the way, a terrible swimmer, but I somehow made it onto this swim team and people put up with me. But I loved it. And there was this calming effect. And you could just exist as like this whole other type of being almost.
Mm-hmm.
And so I loved bringing that into the story too.
There's so many different aspects of it. And, I focus deeply on the stories of mothers and caregivers, the real maternal intuition and the what I believe is baked into any woman and mother, which is this primal unconditional love that we cannot strip or separate from. We have to lean into and in as greater a capacity as we can, especially with children that have, severe, profound disabilities. What as you were researching, and thinking about Leo's character development, what assumptions did you challenge for yourself around caregiving and autism? Because I think, again, it's so complex and it's so nuanced per family, but that word caregiving holds a lot of weight, and it for good or for better or for worse.
I think the biggest challenge or maybe realization is more fitting for me is that not everybody needs to be fixed.
Mm,
And that just because somebody is different than what you might have expected, it doesn't mean that that's not the way they should be. And I really felt like the deeper I got to know Leo as a character, the more I realized that his differences
mm-hmm,
could be viewed as assets
mm-hmm.
and should be.
Should be.
And I also thought it was important to note that also, like, he, for example, doesn't like loud noises. But there's a scene in the book where he blows a whistle really loudly because just because you're one way often doesn't mean you're always that way.
That's
And
right.
I think that people have a tendency to view things really black or white. And it's so important to be able to exist in the gray.
Yeah, without a doubt. I find that the older I get, the more that's illuminated. And also those that can sit in the discomfort of the gray are the ones that do end up having a much more expanded and expansive experience as they age, right? Middle age is and especially for caregivers like myself, and I know you as well, it really, we become the sandwich generation. And then when there's extra high needs of children, if you don't, I always thought I get asked a lot, how is this what you choose? And in my mind, I had no alternative. I had to choose the gray. I knew that if I chose black and white, I was going to get eaten alive.
Sure. Well, one thing I learned while writing the book is that there's a number of studies that show women ages 35 to 54 are by far more stressed than any other demographic. And I
Research my
think
house.
that's exactly. I think that, there's all these demands and there's all this invisible labor of just keeping track of everything and being the person. And then on top of that, I also think that there's a tendency to think that we're really essential in ways that maybe we aren't. But like every time I go on, like I'm going to be unreachable for an hour. I feel like I need to text all my kids, like, I'm going to be out. You can't get me for an hour. But like, they'll be okay,
Uh-huh.
So
Or another example I read recently, someone said, your partner can pack for the kids.
exactly.
They can do that.
Except in your mind, aren't they going to do it wrong?
That's what it's saying, is that what is wrong though? Is it really like that uncertainty of like, well, they might not have this, might have that. There's always a solution to that uncertainty. If you get, it's never so black and white. It's like, yeah, it might be, oh man, we have to get this XYZ when we get there because that wasn't packed, but it really isn't as massive if you can just say, I guess there is an alternative to this, which is
There
what I always
is an
ask and beg
alternative,
to do.
but I think as the parents, or as the mothers, we feel this need to control also that,
Oh, I know.
control for all the variables. And if we let go and let our partner pack for the kid and then something is forgot, it's like so uncomfortable for us to live with that.
Yeah.
And yet important for everybody to try to do it.
To try to do it. And I think that, again, one of the greatest lessons in a life that I never in a million years would have chosen, right? This is not something I thought, gosh, I really want to be a mother of two children with profound unspeaking autism, is that sitting in discomfort and learning through that discomfort is almost like what every major, philosopher and, theologian talks about, through the ages is how we deal with fear and discomfort and control. And I think
And
that
yet it's so difficult.
it's the most difficult thing that I believe that any woman and mother is charged with, regardless of the children that you have. Could you talk to me more about the development of McKenna's character and how you chose for her to be from this more severe end of like the lack of support? Because I come into contact with one-on-one aides of my children who are from a very similar situation where they're learning into a job that they never in a million years would have thought would have been beneficial to their hearts as well.
Sure. So I mentioned I heard that statistic about swimming, and like a day later, I was having this week full of statistics coming
Yeah,
into
yeah.
my head. A day later, I heard on the radio that 8% of American college students experience homelessness at some time during their time in school. And I was like, that can't be right. So,
Right.
I'm on the internet and it turns out it is true. And I just sort of got to thinking, like, how could that happen? How could somebody like get enrolled in college? And I just started thinking, like, there are situations where, for example, what if you had an athlete who is up from a modest background, has limited means, and gets a scholarship so that she can get her education, and something goes wrong? And you could just sort of see that spiraling into a situation where gradually you lose everything. And by the way, that homeless statistic it's not like what you picture, people living in cardboard boxes on the street. It's people crashing on their friends' couches and, somehow muddling their way through so they can get their education.
Mm-hmm.
But it's problematic and it's hard, and especially for someone, who has this elderly grandmother who's battling her own health challenges. And I think one of the themes of the whole book is that we're all struggling. There's and you just never know what other people are going through.
Not a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine always says, I'm not here to participate in the struggle Olympics and win gold. I'm not.
Exactly.
I'm not.
Exactly.
I have a typical 13-year-old daughter who, like painfully typical, all the typical things, right? She's 13, she's testing the nest. And the beauty that I get to receive because I have siblings of hers that are so, neurodivergent in the most extreme degree is that I actually appreciate her typical development so much more. So that's the gift in my deepest of struggle. My deepest of struggle is raising her siblings, right? But what is the byproduct of that? And so I think it all just does even out. There's no gold medal for like who has the hardest of lives.
Right. And it's so important also to be able to have that perspective where you can take a minute to appreciate
The eye rolls, the deep eye rolls.
and the huffed, the big sigh of mom,
Right. Or then, I actually wrote about this in a Substack article. Gosh, it was a while ago now. My daughter Millie with non-speaking autism, her sister Morgan was gone for the week. And I found Millie in Morgan's bedroom laughing her tush off, with her device. And I thought, she knows that she's gone. She knows she shouldn't be in here. Her sister would be so, so upset. And I come in there, I go, exactly, you should not be in here. Morgan is going to be so mad. And she like crossed her legs, like, what's she going to do about it?
Right. That's amazing.
I just thought it was such a beautifully typical thing to experience that I never thought I would get, which is like the annoying little sister barging into her older sister's room. So those are the things I think that illuminate how we are not all, it is not who has a tougher level of struggle, because the INCHSTONES of how you translate experience and what is revealed to you is capable for every one of our lives, every single one of.
And the other thing also is that I think that what you might not find particularly challenging, another person might be the worst thing that ever happened to them.
Exactly. We can't, and how we were raised and our parents and the temperament and the attachment. I mean, I'm sure you could too, I could audit, evolutionary primal development, as a PhD if I really wanted to, because I love learning about it, but it's so complex. So just sitting in and hearing all the stories, I think, which is why INCHSTONES exists, is there are millions of stories to be told around specifically this population of autistic individuals. And I'm very, very just so grateful that you used your own gifts to write this amazing work.
Thank you so much.
Well, Jackie, thank you so much for being here today. This was just a wonderful conversation. I will be linking everything for people to see on the episode summary. And I think, one of the things I will carry with me is that autism isn't just the whole story. It never is. And I think breathing underwater is so much more than autism. It's about sacrifice and a word that I know I think about a lot, which is identity and resilience, and the way that each one of us, through sharing our stories, can be transformed. And I am a nonfiction. I devour a lot of nonfiction, but as someone who knows great fiction, that's what great fiction does. And I believe that your book does exactly that, to offer that extra perspective and then return to our own lives that might sit parallel with a little bit more compassion than we have before.
Well, thank you so much.
Of course. And Jackie, thank you again for sharing your heart, your words today. And it was a pleasure having you on INCHSTONES. Until next time, everyone.
Great chatting.
Thank you.